Rebecca Wilson lifted her wine glass, smiled at everyone around the dinner table, and said, "Honestly, Margaret has become a burden to this family." The room went silent. My son Ethan stared at his plate. My 9-year-old granddaughter Sophie looked at me with frightened eyes. And I sat there, holding the casserole dish I had brought for my own son's birthday dinner. A burden. That was the word my daughter-in-law used for the woman who had spent years helping them stay afloat. She had no idea that the house she proudly called hers, the SUV parked outside, and even the vacation photos hanging on her walls existed because of money I had quietly provided. And before that night was over, I realized something even more painful than Rebecca's words. My son was willing to let me hear them. If you've ever felt invisible inside your own family, I'd truly love to hear your story. Please leave a comment and tell me how this opening makes you feel. If you're listening tonight, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. And if stories about family, forgiveness, and finding your own worth speak to your heart, I hope you'll stay with me, subscribe, and join me for the rest of this journey. My name is Margaret Wilson, and for 45 years, I was never alone. My husband, Daniel, and I built our entire life together in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. We started with almost nothing. He drove deliveries for medical supply companies, and I handled invoices from our kitchen table. Over time, we built a small medical equipment business. We were never rich, but we were comfortable. Most importantly, we trusted each other. Daniel used to tell me, "Money comes and goes. Maggie, family is the real investment." For many years, I believed that. Then Daniel died. It happened 3 years before Rebecca called me a burden. He suffered a heart attack while working in the yard. One moment, he was laughing about the tomatoes we had planted, and the next moment, he was gone. I still remember sitting alone in the hospital parking lot. I was 65 years old, a widow, and completely lost. The house suddenly felt enormous. The silence became unbearable. Even the television felt too loud. For the first year after Daniel passed away, I barely left home. I spent most evenings sitting in his recliner, holding his old sweater and listening to the clock in the living room. Then my son Ethan began calling more often. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone." "I know. Come visit us." "I will." "You should move closer." At first, I refused. That house held every memory of my marriage. But Ethan continued asking. Rebecca also called. She sounded kind. She sounded caring. "Margaret, Sophie misses you. You belong with family. We have plenty of room. We'll take care of you." Those words touched my heart, especially after years of loneliness. Their home was in a beautiful neighborhood outside Columbus. The houses were newer. The schools were excellent. Sophie was only 6 at the time. I adored my granddaughter. She had Daniel's smile. Eventually, I agreed to move. I sold part of our business investments and kept most of the money in retirement accounts and trusts that Daniel and I had created years earlier. I never discussed the amount with anyone, not even Ethan. I purchased a small townhouse only 15 minutes away from their home. Rebecca cried when I moved. She hugged me. "We're finally one big family." I believed her. For the first several months, everything felt wonderful. Every Sunday, I cooked dinner. Rebecca praised my recipes. "Nobody makes pot roast like you." She asked for family stories. She looked through old photographs. She called me Mom. Sometimes she would say, "I never had a mother like you." Those words healed parts of me I didn't know were broken. Ethan seemed happier. Sophie spent entire weekends with me. I helped her with reading. We baked cookies together. We planted flowers. At night, I thanked Daniel. I would sit beside his photograph and say, "You were right. Family really is the investment." But little things began changing. Very slowly, almost too slowly to notice. Rebecca started talking about money more often. She wanted a bigger SUV. She wanted a kitchen renovation. She wanted private dance lessons for Sophie. She wanted expensive vacations. One evening during dinner, she said, "Everyone around us seems to be doing better." Ethan looked uncomfortable. I asked, "Are things difficult financially?" He quickly answered, "No, Mom, everything's fine." Rebecca smiled. "He's just working really hard." A few weeks later, Ethan came to my house alone. He looked exhausted. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes were red. "What's wrong?" I asked. He sat quietly for several seconds. Then he said, "Mom, the mortgage application fell apart." I felt my stomach tighten. "What happened?" "We don't have enough for the down payment." "What about your savings?" He looked down. Medical bills, credit cards, everything got away from us. I poured him coffee. He looked embarrassed. "I hate asking." I reached across the table. "You're my son." He began to cry. That was the first time I saw him cry since Daniel's funeral. "Rebecca doesn't know I came here." "Why?" "She's stressed." I thought about Daniel. I thought about Sophie. And I thought about the family I loved. So I wrote a check. A large one. Enough to save the mortgage. Ethan stared at it. "Mom, I can't." "Yes, you can. I'll pay you back. You can help your daughter someday." Then I made one request. "Don't tell Rebecca." He looked surprised. "Why?" "Because I don't want her to feel ashamed." He nodded. "I promise." That decision changed everything. Although I didn't know it then. The new house was beautiful. Rebecca was thrilled. She walked through every room with excitement. She bought new furniture. She painted walls. She hosted parties. She smiled constantly. And every time she thanked Ethan for working so hard. I stayed quiet. Months later, I quietly paid Sophie's private school tuition. I covered some medical bills. I helped with insurance. Each time, Ethan promised it was temporary. Each time, he said things would improve. Each time, I believed him. Rebecca seemed happier than ever. She started buying designer handbags. She talked about vacations. She compared her life to her friends. One afternoon, she laughed and said, "It's nice finally moving up in the world." I smiled. But something about that sentence stayed with me. Because Daniel and I had spent our entire lives working, saving, sacrificing. And suddenly, the life we had built was being enjoyed by people who didn't know where it came from. At that moment, I still believed love was enough. I still believed gratitude would eventually appear. I still believed my family saw me. I had no idea that the woman calling me mom would one day look directly into my eyes and call me a burden. And I certainly didn't know that my own son would sit beside her in silence. The first time, I paid one of Ethan's bills. I thought it would happen only once. I was wrong. 3 months after I helped them buy the house, Ethan came to my townhouse again. It was raining that evening. He stood at my front door looking exhausted. I opened the door. "Ethan, what's happened?" He rubbed his face. "Mom, can I come in?" I made coffee while he sat quietly at my kitchen table. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "Sophie's tuition is due." I looked at him. "I thought you and Rebecca had planned for that." "We did." "What happened?" He sighed. "The mortgage is higher than we expected." "What about Rebecca's income? She's working fewer hours." I stayed silent. Ethan stared into his coffee. "I hate asking you for help." I reached across the table. "How much?" He told me the amount. It wasn't small. Still, Sophie was my granddaughter. I remembered Daniel telling me that education was one of the best gifts a grandparent could give. So I wrote another check. Ethan looked ashamed. "I'll pay you back." "You don't have to say that every time." He lowered his head. "Please, don't tell Rebecca." That surprised me. "Why not?" "She doesn't want people thinking we need help." I nodded. At the time, I thought I was protecting her pride. I had no idea I was helping build her illusion. A few weeks later, Rebecca invited me to lunch. She was cheerful. Very cheerful. She showed me pictures of a new SUV. "What do you think?" "It's beautiful." "Ethan says we deserve something nicer." I smiled. "You've both worked hard." She laughed. I think things are finally turning around. I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to say that the tuition bill had been paid with money Daniel and I earned over 45 years. But I stayed quiet. That became my habit. Silence. Several months passed. Then Ethan called again. It was almost midnight. "Mom." His voice sounded nervous. "What happened?" "I need to talk to you." He arrived 20 minutes later. He looked older. His tie was loose. His eyes were tired. "The hospital sent another bill." "Is someone sick?" "Sophie broke her arm." "Oh my goodness." "We don't have enough." I sat beside him. "How much do you need?" He hesitated. Too long. "There's also some credit card debt." I looked at him carefully. "How much debt?" He whispered the number. I felt my chest tighten. It was far more than I expected. "What happened?" He looked embarrassed. "Things got out of control." "Does Rebecca know?" "Some of it?" That answer worried me. But again, I thought about my granddaughter. I thought about my family. And I helped. I paid the hospital. I helped reduce the credit cards. I told Ethan something important. This can't continue forever. He nodded. I know. But the truth was simple. Neither of us believed that. The following summer, Rebecca began changing. At first, the changes seemed small. She bought expensive handbags. She talked about designer furniture. She started comparing herself to women in her neighborhood. One afternoon, she said, "Everyone around here drives luxury cars." I laughed. And she smiled. "I think we deserve one too." I said nothing. A month later, there was a new SUV in their driveway. Rebecca proudly showed it to me. "Isn't she beautiful? She's very nice." She smiled. Ethan got a good deal. I looked at my son. He avoided my eyes. Later that evening, I asked him privately, "Can you afford this?" He sighed. "Not really." "Then why buy it?" He looked defeated. Rebecca wanted it. I didn't answer. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Concern. Not about the money, about the direction of my son's marriage. Meanwhile, Sophie continued spending weekends with me. She became my safe place. We baked cookies. We planted flowers. We watched old movies. One afternoon, while we were making brownies, she asked, "Grandma, were Mommy and Daddy poor before?" I smiled. "Why do you ask?" She shrugged. "Mommy says we're finally becoming successful." Children often hear more than adults realize. I kissed her forehead. "You don't need to worry about money." She nodded, but I couldn't stop thinking about her words. Rebecca spoke constantly about appearances, about success, about what other people owned. One evening, she invited me to dinner. The table was beautiful. New dishes, new decorations, expensive wine. She looked proud. During dinner, she said, "Ethan has really stepped up for this family." I looked at my son. He forced a smile. Rebecca continued, "I always knew he had more potential." I noticed Ethan becoming uncomfortable. After dinner, while Rebecca cleaned the kitchen, he quietly said, "Mom, I'm sorry." "For what?" "For letting her believe all this." I looked at him. "You can tell her." He shook his head. "No." "Why?" "Because things are peaceful right now." Peaceful. That word stayed with me. Because sometimes peace is simply the silence that exists before a storm. A few weeks later, Rebecca hosted several neighbors for wine. I stopped by to drop off homemade bread. As I walked inside, I heard her laughing. One woman asked, "How did you two move up so quickly?" Rebecca smiled. "Ethan finally started making real money." Another woman asked, "What about his mother? Doesn't she live nearby?" Rebecca laughed softly. "Margaret is very independent." I stood quietly in the hallway. Then she added, "We help her when she needs us." My hands froze. The bread became heavy in my arms. We help her. Those 4 words cut deeper than they should have, because by that point, I had quietly paid for Sophie's tuition, medical bills, insurance costs, part of the mortgage, several credit cards, and even some home repairs. Yet Rebecca believed she was helping me, or perhaps she wanted others to believe that. That night, I sat alone in my living room. Daniel's photograph sat beside me. I looked at him and said, "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing anymore." For the first time since helping Ethan, doubt entered my heart. Not because of the money, because I was beginning to realize that secrecy had created something dangerous. Rebecca believed the life around her belonged to her. Ethan believed avoiding conflict was protecting everyone, and I believed silence was kindness. But silence can sometimes become permission. And somewhere inside that beautiful house, my daughter-in-law was beginning to believe that she had earned everything she possessed. She still didn't know where it came from. And when the truth finally arrived, it would destroy far more than her pride. The changes in Rebecca did not happen overnight. That was what made them difficult to see. At first, she simply seemed busy. Then she became impatient. Then she became cold. And one day, I realized I no longer felt welcome inside my son's home. It started with small comments. Very small. The kind people can deny later. One Sunday, I brought my homemade chicken casserole. Rebecca opened the door. "Oh." I smiled. "I made dinner." She forced a smile. "We already ordered takeout." I looked down at the casserole dish. "I didn't know." She shrugged. "You should call first." For years, she had encouraged me to visit. Now suddenly, I needed permission. I told myself not to overthink it. A few days later, I stopped by after Sophie's dance class. Sophie ran toward me. "Grandma." She hugged me tightly. Rebecca looked annoyed. "We have homework tonight." "I'll only stay a few minutes." She crossed her arms. "Sophie gets too distracted." I nodded. "Of course." As I left, Sophie whispered, "Don't go yet." My heart hurt. Still, I walked away. I didn't want conflict. I never wanted conflict. One afternoon, Rebecca invited me for coffee. I thought perhaps we would finally talk. Instead, she looked at my sweater and said, "You should let me take you shopping." I laughed. "What's wrong with my sweater?" "It's a little old-fashioned." I smiled politely. "I suppose so." She continued. "And maybe a haircut." I looked at her. "A haircut?" She nodded. "You'd look younger." I understood what she meant. She thought I looked old, perhaps even embarrassing. I tried not to take it personally, but little comments continued. "You shouldn't spoil Sophie. Too much sugar isn't healthy. She already has enough toys. You don't have to come every weekend." Every sentence sounded polite. Every sentence pushed me farther away. Ethan noticed it too. One evening, I asked him, "Is Rebecca upset with me?" He immediately answered, "No. She seems different. She's stressed." That became his answer for everything. She's stressed. She's tired. She's overwhelmed. Meanwhile, Rebecca continued buying things. New furniture, new clothes, new decorations. One afternoon, I visited and noticed an expensive coffee machine. "That's nice." She smiled. "It was on sale." The following month, there was a new dining table, then new patio furniture, then expensive artwork. I began wondering how they could afford everything. But every time I asked Ethan, he said the same thing. We're managing. Yet his face told another story. He looked exhausted. He had lost weight. He worked longer hours. Meanwhile, Rebecca spent more time with her friends. She joined a country club. She attended wine tastings. She talked constantly about appearances. One afternoon, while helping Sophie with homework, I overheard Rebecca speaking on the phone. I swear, sometimes I feel like I have 3 children. I froze. She laughed. Yes, Ethan. Then she lowered her voice. And his mother. I stood silently in the hallway. She continued. She means well, but she's always around. Something inside me broke. Because I wasn't always around. I usually waited for invitations. I tried to stay respectful. I tried not to interfere. Yet somehow, I had become a problem. That evening, I sat in my car for several minutes before driving home. For the first time since moving to Columbus, I cried. Not because Rebecca disliked me, because I couldn't understand why. What had changed? What had I done? Several days later, Sophie called me. She used her tablet. Her small face appeared on the screen. Grandma? Hi. Sweetheart. She looked nervous. Can I tell you something? Of course. She lowered her voice. Mom said you come here too much. My heart stopped. What exactly did she say? Sophie hesitated. She said people need space. I smiled for her sake. Sometimes adults get busy. But I like when you come. I like seeing you too. She looked sad. Mom says not every weekend. After we ended the call, I sat quietly in my living room. Daniel's photograph stood beside the fireplace. I spoke to him. I don't know what happened. The following Sunday, I decided not to visit. No call came. No invitation. Nothing. The next weekend was the same. For the first time in years, I spent Sunday completely alone. I walked through my townhouse. I watered my flowers. I watched television. But the silence felt different now. It was not the silence of widowhood. It was the silence of exclusion. A few days later, Ethan finally called. Mom, are you okay? I'm fine. You haven't visited. I laughed softly. I didn't think Rebecca wanted me there. He became quiet. You know how she is. That sentence stayed with me. You know how she is? As if her behavior was something everyone had accepted, including him. I asked carefully. Do you want me around? Of course. Then why don't you say anything? He sighed. I don't want arguments. I closed my eyes. My son was avoiding conflict. Rebecca was setting the rules, and I was becoming invisible. One Saturday, Sophie had a school performance. I arrived early. I brought flowers. When I found my seat, Rebecca looked surprised. Oh, you're here. I smiled. Sophie invited me. Rebecca forced a smile. During intermission, several parents gathered around us. One woman asked, Is this Ethan's mother? Rebecca nodded. Yes. The woman smiled at me. It's wonderful that you help with Sophie. Before I could answer, Rebecca said, Margaret has a lot of free time. Everyone laughed politely. I laughed too, but inside, I felt smaller. Free time, not grandmother, not family. Simply an elderly woman with nothing else to do. That night, Sophie hugged me after the performance. I wanted you here. I wouldn't miss it. She smiled. Then she whispered something that frightened me. Mom gets mad when I talk about you. I looked down. What do you mean? She says Grandma doesn't need to be here all the time. I kissed her forehead. You don't worry about grown-up problems. But I worried. Because children often tell the truth, adults hide. A week later, Rebecca sent a text. Please call before coming over. Simple words, polite words, but they felt like a locked door. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the message. Then I opened my checkbook. I looked at the payments I had made, the mortgage assistance, the tuition, the medical bills, the insurance, the repairs, thousands upon thousands of dollars. Yet somehow, I had become an inconvenience. And for the first time, I began asking myself a question I had avoided for years. What happens when the people you help no longer see your value? I didn't know the answer yet, but somewhere deep inside me, something had started changing. And soon, Rebecca Wilson was going to discover that the quiet woman she had begun pushing aside was not nearly as powerless as she believed. Ethan's 42nd birthday arrived in early October. Rebecca decided to host a large dinner. She invited neighbors, several couples from their country club, Ethan's co-workers, and a few family friends. The house looked beautiful. Candles covered the dining table. Fresh flowers stood in every room. Soft music played in the background. Everything looked perfect, at least on the outside. 3 days before the dinner, I called Rebecca. Would you like me to bring anything? There was a short silence. Finally, she said, a casserole would be nice. Her voice sounded cold, but I ignored it. I spent the entire afternoon cooking Ethan's favorite meal. The same casserole I had made since he was 10 years old. Daniel had loved it too. As I drove to the house, I felt nervous. I couldn't explain why. Sometimes your heart notices danger before your mind does. When I arrived, the driveway was already full. Luxury cars lined the street. I carried the casserole inside. Rebecca barely looked at me. Oh, you made it. I forced a smile. I hope I'm not late. No, we're just getting started. She immediately walked away. No hug, no welcome, nothing. I placed the casserole in the kitchen. Several guests stood nearby. One woman looked at me. You must be Ethan's mother. Yes, she smiled. Rebecca talks about you. I smiled politely. I wondered what exactly Rebecca said. Ethan finally walked over. Mom. He hugged me. His hug felt brief, almost nervous. Happy birthday. Thank you. I studied his face. He looked tired again. I whispered, everything okay? He nodded. Just a long week. I wanted to believe him. Dinner began around 7. Everyone sat around the large dining table. Wine flowed. People laughed. Rebecca enjoyed being the center of attention. She talked about the house, the neighborhood, Sophie's school, their recent weekend trip. One guest said, "You've really built a beautiful life." Rebecca smiled proudly. "We've worked very hard." I noticed Ethan looking down at his plate. Another woman asked, "Do you ever get help from family?" Rebecca laughed. "Not exactly." Several people smiled. I felt uncomfortable. Then Rebecca poured herself more wine. That was when everything changed. A man sitting beside Ethan asked, "Do you think your mother will ever move in with you?" I immediately said, "Oh, no. I love my townhouse." Rebecca laughed. A strange laugh. Too loud. She lifted her wine glass. "Honestly, Margaret has become a burden to this family." Silence. Complete silence. I felt the air leave my lungs. Someone put down a fork. Another guest looked at Ethan. I looked at my son. He stared at his plate. He said nothing. Rebecca continued speaking. "I know that sounds harsh." She laughed again. "But older parents can become very demanding." My hands started shaking. I looked at Sophie. She sat frozen beside me. The woman across from Rebecca said carefully, "Margaret seems lovely." Rebecca smiled. "She means well, as if I were a problem everyone tolerated." She took another sip of wine. "She visits constantly." I wanted to speak. I couldn't. Sometimes people need boundaries. My chest hurt. 45 years of marriage, decades of work, years of sacrifice. And I was sitting in a house I had helped save while my daughter-in-law publicly described me as a burden. Still, Ethan said nothing. Not one word. I quietly placed my napkin on the table. "I think I should go." Rebecca looked surprised. "Oh, don't be dramatic." Dramatic. The room became even quieter. Ethan finally spoke. "Mom." But he didn't finish. He didn't defend me. He didn't correct her. He simply said my name. I stood up. Sophie immediately grabbed my hand. "Grandma." I forced a smile. "It's okay, sweetheart." Rebecca sighed loudly. "This is exactly what I mean." I looked at her. For the first time in years. Really looked at her. And I realized something. She did not respect me. She did not appreciate me. And perhaps she never had. I picked up my purse. One of the guests stood. "Can I help you?" "No. Thank you." As I walked toward the front door, I heard Rebecca speaking behind me. "She takes everything personally." Those words followed me outside. The October air felt cold. I sat in my car. I could not start the engine. My hands would not stop shaking. 10 minutes later, I realized I had forgotten my casserole dish. I almost drove away. But it had belonged to Daniel's mother. So I walked back inside. The voices from the dining room reached the kitchen. Nobody knew I had returned. Then I heard Rebecca. "Honestly, she should probably be in assisted living." Someone said, "She's not that old." Rebecca laughed. "She depends on Ethan emotionally." Another voice asked, "Does she help financially?" Rebecca laughed again. "No." We're the ones who help her. I froze. Every word felt like a knife. Then Rebecca said something that changed everything. Sometimes I think she'd move in tomorrow if we allowed it. Several people laughed softly. I stood there holding the casserole dish. My heart broke. Not because Rebecca insulted me, because she truly believed her own story. She genuinely thought she was supporting me. She had no idea that I had spent years protecting her family, protecting her image, protecting her lifestyle. I quietly left the house. No one saw me. The drive home felt endless. I parked in my garage and sat in the darkness for nearly an hour. Eventually, I entered my house. Daniel's photograph stood beside the fireplace. I sat in his old chair, and for the first time since his death, I felt completely alone. Not because he was gone, because my family had disappeared while standing right in front of me. At nearly midnight, my phone rang. It was Ethan. I stared at the screen. I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, another call. Then a text. Mom, please talk to me. I placed the phone face down because one question kept repeating inside my mind. How could a woman call me a burden while living inside a life I had helped pay for? And an even more painful question followed. How could my son sit beside her and stay silent that night? I barely slept, and by morning, I knew something had changed inside me. For the first time, I stopped asking how to protect my family, and I began asking how to protect myself. I did not answer Ethan's calls that night or the next morning. For the first time in my life, I needed silence, real silence. Not the kind that comes from loneliness. The kind that comes when your heart has been broken. At 7 o'clock the next morning, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table. The house felt different. The woman who had left for Ethan's birthday dinner no longer existed. Something inside me had changed. For years, I had focused on protecting everyone else. Now I was finally asking who was protecting me. My phone rang again. Ethan. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a message appeared. Mom, please talk to me. Then another. Rebecca had too much wine. She didn't mean it. I stared at the screen. Too much wine. That excuse made me angry. Because alcohol does not create new thoughts. It simply removes filters. Rebecca had not invented those words at dinner. She had carried them inside her for years. Around noon, there was a knock at my door. It was Ethan. He looked terrible. Red eyes, wrinkled clothes, no sleep. Mom, I stepped aside. He entered quietly. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, I'm sorry. I looked at him. For which part? He lowered his eyes. Everything. I waited. Rebecca didn't mean. I interrupted him. Stop. He looked surprised. Don't tell me what she meant. He sat down. I didn't know she would say that. But you knew she felt it. He said nothing. That silence answered my question. I sat across from him. When she called me a burden, why didn't you speak? He rubbed his forehead. I didn't want a scene. I almost laughed. There already was a scene. He looked miserable. I was shocked. No, Ethan, you were afraid. Tears appeared in his eyes. For a moment, I saw the little boy I had raised. But he was no longer a boy. He was a man, a husband, a father, and he had allowed his wife to humiliate his mother. After he left, I walked into my office. For years, I had kept every financial document in a large filing cabinet. Daniel used to organize everything. After his death, I continued the habit. I opened the first drawer. Mortgage documents, investment accounts, insurance papers, trust agreements, bank statements. At first, I simply wanted to distract myself. Then I started adding numbers. The down payment for the house, Sophie's tuition, medical bills, insurance, home repairs, credit card payments, unexpected expenses, vacation assistance. I spent almost 4 hours reviewing everything. When I finally finished, I sat back in my chair. The total shocked me. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money Daniel and I had earned over decades. Money I had quietly transferred because I loved my family. I suddenly realized something painful. Rebecca was living a lifestyle she believed Ethan had provided, and Ethan had allowed her to believe it. I opened another folder. Inside were copies of several payments. One credit card statement caught my attention. The account belonged to Ethan, but many charges were clearly Rebecca's. Designer stores, luxury cosmetics, spa services, expensive restaurants, and every month, Ethan struggled to pay it. Several times, I had unknowingly helped reduce that debt. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time, anger replaced sadness. Not because of the money, because of the disrespect. That evening, my friend Linda called. She had known Daniel and me for more than 30 years. "How are you?" I finally told someone the truth. Everything. The dinner, the insult, the silence. Linda listened quietly. Then she asked one question. "Margaret, does Rebecca know how much you've done?" "No." "Does Ethan?" "Mostly." "And why have you hidden it?" I looked around the room because I honestly didn't know. Perhaps I wanted to protect my son. Perhaps I wanted Rebecca to love me without money. Perhaps I simply believed kindness required secrecy. Linda spoke softly. "You taught people to take you for granted." Her words hurt because they were true. The next morning, I continued reviewing paperwork. That was when I discovered something else. The account Ethan used for several household expenses still received monthly transfers from one of the family investment funds Daniel and I had established years earlier. I had forgotten about it. The money was modest compared to my other assets, but it paid several recurring expenses, including part of the SUV payment. I stared at the statement. Rebecca drove that vehicle every day, and she had no idea who helped pay for it. Suddenly, memories returned. Her laughter at dinner, her comments about me, her friends, her expensive purchases, her saying, "We've finally become successful." That afternoon, Ethan called again. This time, I answered, "Mom, what do you want?" "Ethan, I want to fix this." "You can't." Silence. Then he asked quietly, "Are you angry?" I took a deep breath. No. That surprised him. "What are you then?" I looked at Daniel's photograph. "I'm awake." He said nothing. I continued. For years, I kept telling myself things would improve. They can. No, because this didn't happen in one night. He sounded exhausted. "What should I do?" I answered honestly. "I don't know." That frightened him, because for 42 years, I always had answers. But this time, I didn't. After the call, I opened my desk drawer. Inside sat our original estate plan. Daniel and I had written it nearly 15 years earlier. Everything had been designed to protect our family. Back then, Rebecca was not even in our lives. I read Daniel's handwritten note inside the folder. Protect each other. Simple words. Beautiful words. But something had changed. I realized I could no longer protect everyone equally, especially people who did not value my sacrifice. Late that evening, I received a text from Rebecca. "I'm sorry if you were offended." I read it several times. Not, "I'm sorry I hurt you." Not, "I'm sorry for what I said." Simply, "I'm sorry if you were offended." I placed my phone down. For the first time, I saw her clearly, and that clarity brought something unexpected. Calm, because I finally understood the truth. Rebecca did not think she needed me. She believed I was weak. She believed I would always stay quiet. She believed kindness meant surrender. But as I sat alone in my office, surrounded by decades of financial records, I realized something she still didn't know. Nearly everything she enjoyed rested on foundations that Daniel and I had built, and if she continued treating me as a burden, eventually she would discover exactly whose shoulders had been carrying her life. 3 days after the birthday dinner, I called Charles Bennett. Charles had been our family attorney for nearly 20 years. He had helped Daniel and me write our wills. He had organized our trusts. He knew every detail of our finances. Most importantly, he had known Daniel. When his secretary answered, she said, "Charles can see you tomorrow morning." I almost canceled. Part of me still wanted to believe things would somehow improve, but another part of me knew I needed answers. The next morning, I drove downtown. Charles stood when I entered his office. He was 72 now, gray hair, calm eyes. He shook my hand. "Margaret, thank you for seeing me." He immediately noticed something was wrong. "What happened?" I sat down. For nearly an hour, I told him everything. Rebecca, the dinner, the insult, Ethan's silence. Charles listened quietly. When I finished, he folded his hands. "What do you want to do?" I looked at him. "I don't know." He nodded. "Then let's start with facts." He opened several files. Some belonged to Daniel and me. Others contained our trust documents. For years, I had avoided reviewing them. Daniel always handled these meetings. after he died. I signed papers without asking many questions. Charles opened one folder. The educational trust for Sophie is secure. I nodded. Good. He continued. Your retirement accounts are healthy. Another file. The investment portfolio is stable. I felt relieved. Then he opened one document that surprised me. The house. I frowned. What about it? Charles adjusted his glasses. Part of the down payment came through your family trust. Yes. Which means the trust still holds a financial interest. I stared at him. What does that mean? It means the property isn't entirely theirs? For several seconds, I said nothing. I remembered Rebecca proudly walking through that house, talking about what she owned, showing her friends, mocking me inside those walls. And now I learned that Daniel's trust still partially protected that property. Charles spoke carefully. I'm not suggesting legal action. I know. But you should understand your position. Position. That word stayed with me, because for years, I had believed I had no position, no voice, no rights, only obligations. Charles opened another folder. The monthly transfers to Ethan are still active. I looked surprised. What transfers? He showed me several statements. The family support account. Daniel had established it years earlier. The purpose was simple. Emergency assistance for our children. The account automatically transferred money every month. I had completely forgotten. The amount wasn't enormous, but it helped cover expenses, including several bills connected to Ethan's household. I sat quietly. Rebecca doesn't know. Charles looked at me. Does Ethan? I think so. He leaned back. Margaret, secrecy sometimes creates misunderstanding. I smiled sadly. I've become very good at secrecy. He nodded. Perhaps too good. After reviewing the finances, Charles asked a difficult question. What happens if Ethan and Rebecca continue treating you this way? I had no answer, because until recently, I had never considered protecting myself. I had spent years protecting everyone else. He continued. You don't have to decide anything today. I know, but you should understand your options. He explained the trust, the property interests, the education fund, the investment accounts, everything Daniel and I had built. When the meeting ended, he handed me copies. Take your time. I stood. Daniel trusted you. Charles smiled softly. He also trusted you. As I walked to my car, I suddenly felt stronger, not because of money, because of knowledge. For years, Rebecca had treated me like an unwanted guest, but I had finally remembered something. I wasn't a helpless widow. I wasn't dependent. I wasn't a burden. I was the woman who had spent 45 years building a life. That afternoon, Ethan called. Mom, can we meet? I agreed. We met at a small coffee shop. He looked exhausted. Again. How's Rebecca? He rubbed his forehead. Angry. At whom? He looked embarrassed. Everyone. I took a sip of coffee. Did she apologize? He hesitated. She said she overreacted. Did she apologize? No? I nodded. He finally asked, "Where were you today?" "I met with Charles." His eyes widened. "Our lawyer?" "Yes." "Why?" I answered honestly, "Because I needed to understand my finances." His face became pale. "Mom, are you cutting us off?" The question surprised me, not because he asked, because he asked so quickly. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "How are you feeling?" His first concern was money. I looked directly at him. "Is that what worries you?" He immediately looked ashamed. "No." But his face told another story. I spoke softly. "Ethan, do you know how much help I've given?" He looked down. "Most of it." "Does Rebecca?" "No." "Why?" He sighed. "Because she thinks we've done it ourselves." I nodded. "And you've allowed her to believe that?" He didn't answer. The waitress brought our coffee. The silence between us felt heavy. Finally, he said something that frightened me. "Rebecca says you hate her now." I looked at him. "I barely know her." He seemed confused. I continued. "The woman I thought I knew would never call me a burden." He stared at the table. "She's under pressure." I suddenly became angry. "No, Ethan, stop protecting her." Several people turned toward us. I lowered my voice. "Who protects me?" He looked shocked, perhaps because I had never raised my voice before. Not once in his entire life. I took a deep breath. "Your father spent his entire life building security for this family." He nodded. "And I've spent years helping you." "Yes." "But somehow I've become the problem." Tears filled his eyes. "I'm sorry." I believed him, but apologies could not erase silence. When we left the restaurant, he hugged me. For a moment, he felt like my little boy again. Then he said something that worried me. "Please don't do anything." I looked at him. "What does that mean?" "Rebecca is already upset." I almost laughed. Even now, even after everything, his greatest fear was Rebecca becoming upset. That evening, I sat alone in my living room. I spread the financial documents across the table. House, trust, education fund, investments, support accounts, everything Daniel and I had built. For the first time, I understood something clearly. Rebecca believed she held power. She believed she controlled the family. She believed I was dependent. But the truth was very different. The foundations beneath her life belonged to people she had insulted, and if she ever discovered that truth, the shock would be far greater than mine had been at that dinner table, because she still had no idea how much of her world rested quietly in Margaret Wilson's hands. For almost 2 weeks after my meeting with Charles, I barely saw Rebecca. That was unusual. Normally she called whenever she needed something, a babysitter, a school pickup, a recipe, advice. But suddenly, there was silence. Ethan visited once. Sophie came over one Saturday afternoon. Rebecca stayed away. At first, I thought she might feel guilty. I was wrong. One afternoon, Sophie sat at my kitchen table, coloring pictures. She looked up and asked, "Grandma, are you coming to Mommy's party?" I frowned. "What party?" She looked surprised. "You don't know." Apparently, I didn't. Sophie explained that Rebecca was hosting a large gathering at their house. Friends from the country club, neighbors, several business couples, a wine evening. I forced a smile. "Sounds fun." Sophie nodded. "Mom bought a new dress?" After she left, I sat quietly. I had not been invited. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. 3 years earlier, Rebecca had called me family. Now she didn't even tell me about gatherings inside a house I had helped save. 2 days later, Ethan called. "Mom." "Yes." "I wanted you to hear this from me." "What?" "Rebecca is having people over Saturday." I waited. He sounded uncomfortable. "She thought maybe you might not want to come." I almost laughed. "Did she?" He sighed. "I didn't agree." "But you didn't disagree." Silence. Again, always silence. That Saturday evening, I stayed home. I made tea. I watched television. Around 7 o'clock, Linda called. "How are you?" "I'm fine." She knew I was lying. "Come have dinner with us." "I don't want to bother anyone." She laughed. "Margaret, stop saying that. Bother, burden, problem." Those words had begun living inside my head. Around 8 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Sophie. "Grandma." "Hi, sweetheart." She whispered, "There are lots of people here." "That sounds exciting." She became quiet. "I miss you." My heart broke. "I miss you too." Then she said something strange. Mom says grown-ups need privacy." I didn't answer, because I already understood. Rebecca wanted distance. The following Tuesday, I went to the grocery store. As I walked through the produce section, a woman approached me. I recognized her immediately. She had attended Ethan's birthday dinner. "Margaret?" "Hello." She looked uncomfortable. "I hope you're doing okay." I smiled politely. "I'm fine." She hesitated. Then she said something unexpected. "I was at Rebecca's party last weekend." I nodded. "I heard about it." She looked embarrassed. "She talked about you." My stomach tightened. "What did she say?" The woman looked around. "She said you were becoming dependent on Ethan." I felt my chest grow cold. She continued carefully. "She said you're lonely and need a lot of attention." I couldn't speak, because it wasn't just the insult. It was the story. Rebecca had created an entire version of my life, and she was sharing it. The woman touched my arm. I didn't believe her. I thanked her and walked away, but the words stayed with me. That evening, I called Ethan. "Did Rebecca talk about me at the party?" He became quiet. "Mom, yes or no?" Some things were said. "What things?" He sighed. "She said you struggle living alone." "I do not." "I know." "Did you correct her?" Silence. Again. I closed my eyes, because by then, I already knew the answer. 3 days later, something happened that changed everything. Rebecca finally called. Her voice sounded unusually sweet. Margaret. Hello? I was wondering if you could stop by Saturday. I immediately became suspicious. Why? We want to discuss something. What? Oh, just family stuff. I agreed, mostly because I wanted answers. Saturday afternoon. I arrived at their house. Rebecca opened the door. She smiled. Too much. The same smile she used years ago. The one that suddenly felt fake. Ethan sat in the living room. He looked nervous. Sophie was upstairs. Rebecca brought coffee. Then she began talking. You know how complicated finances can become? I said nothing. She continued. If something happened to you, Ethan would have a lot to handle. I looked at her. What are you asking? She smiled. We were thinking maybe we could help manage things. My stomach tightened. Manage what? Your accounts. I stared at her. My accounts. She nodded. You shouldn't have to worry about paperwork. I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman who called me a burden now wanted access to my finances. Ethan looked miserable. Rebecca continued. We know a financial advisor. I spoke carefully. I already have an attorney. She smiled. Of course. But family should help family. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Rebecca brought several papers. Not legal documents, just information forms. But her intention was obvious. She wanted involvement, control, access. I looked at Ethan. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That hurt more than Rebecca's words. Because he knew. He knew where the money came from. He knew what I had sacrificed. Yet he sat quietly while his wife discussed my finances as if I were incapable. I folded the papers. I'll think about it. Rebecca looked disappointed. I just want what's best. I stood. I'm sure you do. As I walked toward the front door, I heard voices outside. Several women from Rebecca's neighborhood had arrived early. One of them smiled. Oh, you're Ethan's mom. Before I could answer, Rebecca laughed. Yes, Margaret worries about everything. The women laughed politely. Rebecca continued. I'm trying to convince her to let us help manage her affairs. Affairs? As if I were confused. Fragile. Dependent. I suddenly understood something. Rebecca truly believed I needed her. She genuinely thought she was the responsible one. She had absolutely no idea that the down payment on the house, Sophie's tuition, medical bills, part of the mortgage, the family support account, and even some of the SUV payments all came from me. As I drove home, my anger disappeared. Because anger had been replaced by clarity. Rebecca wasn't simply disrespectful. She was confident. Confident because she believed I had no power, no money, no choices, no value. That evening, I opened the drawer containing my financial records. I looked at the trust documents, the investment accounts, the property papers. Then I thought about Rebecca asking to help manage my affairs. I almost smiled, because if she ever discovered whose money had built her lifestyle, she would realize something devastating. The woman she called a burden had been quietly carrying her family for years, and soon the truth would begin finding its way to her front door. After the conversation about my finances, I could not stop thinking about Ethan, not Rebecca, my son, because Rebecca had shown me exactly who she was. But Ethan was harder to understand. He loved me. I knew that. He loved Sophie. I knew that too. Yet somehow, he had spent years allowing his wife to create a story that was not true. And every time he stayed silent, that story became stronger. 2 days after my visit to their house, I called him. "Can we talk?" His voice sounded nervous. "About what?" "Just you and me. We met at a small diner we used to visit when he was a teenager. The same booth, the same coffee, the same waitress. For a moment, it felt like the past. Then reality returned. Ethan looked exhausted. He had dark circles under his eyes. His hands trembled slightly. "Are you sleeping?" I asked. "Not much." "How are things at home?" He stared at his coffee. "Complicated." I waited. Finally, he said, "Rebecca is angry." "About what?" "Everything." I almost smiled. For years, Rebecca had controlled every room she entered. Now, for the first time, things felt uncertain. I asked quietly, "Does she know you met me?" "Yes." "And," he sighed, "she thinks you're trying to turn me against her." I looked at him. "Ethan, I haven't asked you to choose." "I know." "Have I?" "No." The waitress refilled our coffee. Neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had lived inside me for weeks. "Why didn't you defend me?" He closed his eyes. "I don't know." "That's not true." He looked away. "I was afraid." "Of Rebecca." He nodded. The answer hurt. Not because he feared his wife, because he feared conflict more than losing his mother. I sat quietly. He continued speaking. "You don't understand what things are like." "Then explain." He rubbed his forehead. "If I disagree with her, we fight for days. And if you stay silent," he looked down, "you get hurt." Exactly. For the first time, he began speaking honestly, really honestly. "Mom, Rebecca wasn't always like this." "When did she change?" He thought for several seconds. "After the house." I said nothing. "The neighborhood, the friends, the lifestyle." He swallowed. Everything became about appearances. That matched what I had seen. The designer clothes, the expensive dinners, the parties, the constant comparisons. He spoke quietly. "Nothing ever feels like enough." I asked the question that had been bothering me. "Does she know about the money?" He shook his head. "No." "Why not?" He looked ashamed. "Because she believes I've provided everything, and you've allowed her to believe that." He nodded. Tears appeared in his eyes. I wanted her to be proud of me. Those words broke my heart because suddenly I understood. This wasn't just about money. It was about Ethan wanting to feel successful, wanting to feel respected, wanting to be enough. But instead of telling the truth, he had built his marriage on silence. And silence always collects interest. Eventually, the debt comes due. I asked carefully, "Has Rebecca ever asked where the money came from?" He laughed bitterly. "Many times." "What did you tell her? Bonuses, investments, overtime?" I stared at him. She believed that she wanted to. That sentence stayed with me. People often believe the stories they most want to hear. Ethan continued. "She thinks you're comfortable, but not wealthy." "How comfortable?" He hesitated. "She thinks you mostly live on Social Security." I almost laughed. After everything, after years of support. Rebecca thought I needed financial help. Then Ethan said something that shocked me. "She actually believes we're helping you." I felt cold. "What do you mean?" He looked embarrassed. "She tells people we check on you." I remembered the woman at the grocery store, the neighbors, the party, the comments. Suddenly, everything made sense. Rebecca wasn't pretending. She genuinely believed her version of reality. I asked softly, "Have you ever corrected her?" He looked down. "No." "Why?" He answered immediately. "Because I was afraid she'd ask questions." Questions. The truth, the money, the support, everything he had hidden. I leaned back. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, Ethan said something I never expected. "She asked me to ask you for more money." I looked at him. "When?" "Several times." "Why?" "She wants kitchen renovations." I felt my stomach tighten. "And?" I told her no. "But she thinks you can help." He nodded. "She thinks you're lonely and want to feel useful." Those words hurt, because they revealed exactly how Rebecca saw me. Not as family, not as a grandmother, not as the woman who helped save their home. Simply an elderly widow looking for purpose. I looked directly at my son. "Ethan, what do you want?" He seemed surprised. "What do you mean?" "Your marriage, your life, your family." He looked exhausted. "I want peace." I shook my head. "No." He frowned. "Peace isn't possible without truth." For the first time, he began crying. Not loudly, just quietly, like a little boy. "I've made a mess." I reached across the table. He took my hand. "I don't know how to fix it." I answered honestly. "I don't either." As we left the diner, he hugged me. The hug lasted longer than usual. Before getting into his car, he said something that stayed with me. "If she finds out, everything will explode." I looked at him. What exactly will explode? My marriage. I drove home thinking about those words. But another question entered my mind. If a marriage can survive lies, but not truth, what kind of marriage is it? 3 days later, Sophie came to visit. We baked cookies, watched movies, played cards. Before Ethan picked her up, She sat beside me on the couch. Grandma. Yes. Are you mad at Daddy? Children always ask the hardest questions. I smiled gently. No. Mom says everybody is upset. I brushed her hair from her face. Adults sometimes make mistakes. She nodded. Then she whispered something that frightened me. Mom said we might have money problems. I froze. What did she say? Sophie looked nervous. She said Daddy doesn't tell her things. Suddenly, everything became clear. The pressure, the arguments, the tension. Rebecca was beginning to suspect something. She did not know the truth, but she knew there were secrets, and secrets eventually find their way into daylight. That evening, Ethan called. His voice sounded tired. Mom. Yes. I think she's starting to ask questions. I walked toward my office. The files sat exactly where I had left them. The trust papers, the payment records, the statements, years of hidden support. I looked at Daniel's photograph. Then I answered. Maybe it's time she gets some answers. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted several seconds. Because both of us knew something. The truth was getting closer. And when Rebecca Wilson finally discovered who had been funding the life she proudly showed to the world, nothing inside that house would ever be the same again. 3 days after my conversation with Ethan, the truth began moving on its own. Nobody planned it. Nobody controlled it. And that made it impossible to stop. It started on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was watering my plants when my phone rang. It was Sophie. She sounded excited. Grandma? Hello? Sweetheart? I found your name. I smiled. My name? On a letter. My stomach tightened. What letter? She lowered her voice. It came in the mail? At your house? Yes. Children often notice details adults ignore. I spoke carefully. What kind of letter? I don't know. Daddy got upset. The line suddenly became quiet. Then I heard Rebecca's voice in the background. Sophie, give me the phone. The call ended. I stood in my kitchen for several seconds. Something had happened. I could feel it. An hour later, Ethan called. His voice sounded strained. Mom? What happened? Silence. Then he said, a bank statement arrived. I sat down. Which account? The support account. I closed my eyes. Of all the documents, of all the papers, it had finally happened. Who saw it? Sophie found it. And Rebecca? Yes. I waited. He continued. She asked questions. What did you say? Nothing. That surprised me. For years, Ethan had hidden everything. Now he said nothing. Perhaps he was finally tired. That evening, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Rebecca opening that envelope, seeing my name, seeing the transfers, seeing numbers she never expected. The next morning, Ethan arrived at my house. He looked pale. He walked inside and sat down. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, he said, She thinks it's a mistake. I almost smiled. What kind of mistake? She thinks you're paying one bill. One bill? He nodded. She doesn't understand. I looked at him. Do you? He sighed. I understand now. He reached into his jacket and pulled out several papers. The statements, the transfers, the account information. He placed them on my table. I forgot this account even existed. So did I. He stared at the documents. Mom. Yes. How much have you actually given us? I looked out the window. I don't know exactly, he whispered. Hundreds of thousands. I nodded. His face changed. Not because of greed, because of guilt. He looked like a man finally seeing the truth. For years, he had told himself the help was temporary, small, manageable. Now the reality sat in front of him. He began crying. I failed you. I reached for his hand. You failed yourself too. He lowered his head. I let her believe everything. Yes. And now, he looked exhausted. Now she's asking questions. The questions came quickly. Why is your mother's name on this account? Why are these payments connected to the house? Why are there transfers? Why didn't you tell me the lies were becoming too heavy? That afternoon, Rebecca called me. For the first time in weeks, her voice sounded different, careful, very careful. Margaret. Hello? I wanted to ask you something. Go ahead. She hesitated. Did you help Ethan financially? I looked at Daniel's photograph sitting beside my desk. For years, I had hidden the truth. Suddenly, I felt tired. Very tired. Yes. Silence. How much? I don't think that's a phone conversation. She became quiet. Then she said something surprising. Why didn't anyone tell me? I almost laughed. Because for the first time, she sounded hurt, as if she had been deceived. And perhaps she had, just not in the way she believed. She continued. Ethan says there are other accounts. Yes. How many? Several. Her breathing changed. She was beginning to understand. Not the whole truth, only the edge of it. That evening, Ethan called again. She went through our files. What did she find? The mortgage documents. I felt my stomach tighten. The down payment records. The trust references. My name. Daniel's trust. Everything. He continued. She's asking why your name appears. What did you tell her? The truth. I sat quietly. The whole truth. Some of it. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan said something I never expected. She's angry at me. Why? Because I lied. I closed my eyes. At last. Not anger toward me. Not pity. Not excuses. Reality. Friday evening. Sophie came to my house unexpectedly. Ethan brought her. Rebecca stayed home. Sophie ran into my arms. Grandma? I hugged her tightly. She looked worried. Mom and Dad keep arguing. I kissed her forehead. It's not your fault, she whispered. Mom cried. That surprised me. Rebecca rarely showed weakness. Perhaps the truth had finally frightened her. After Sophie went upstairs, Ethan sat in my living room. The house was quiet. He looked older than 42. She asked me something. What? She asked if you've been paying for the SUV. I nodded. His eyes widened. You have partially. He covered his face. Oh my God. There are other things too. He looked at me. How many things don't I know? I answered honestly. Probably more than you realize. He sat silently. Then he asked the question that had been waiting for years. Why did you do all of it? I looked toward Daniel's photograph. Because we loved you. He cried again, not loudly, just quietly. And suddenly, I saw my little boy again, the one who had lost his father, the one who wanted to provide for his family, the one who had become trapped between pride and truth. Before leaving, he stood at the front door. Rebecca wants to meet. When? Soon? Why? He looked directly at me. Because she finally understands that something is very wrong. I nodded. But inside, I knew something else. Rebecca still did not understand. Not really. She had discovered a few payments, a few documents, a few accounts, but she had not yet seen the complete picture. The tuition, the medical bills, the credit cards, the insurance, the trust, the property interest, the years of quiet support. And when she finally sat across from me and heard everything, the woman who once called me a burden would be forced to confront the most painful truth of all. The life she proudly claimed as her own had been standing on Margaret Wilson's shoulders for years. Rebecca came to my house on a Sunday afternoon. For the first time in years, she arrived alone. No Ethan, no Sophie, no audience, just Rebecca. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked exhausted. No makeup, no perfect clothes, no confident smile. She stepped inside quietly. Thank you for seeing me. I nodded. Sit down. The living room felt unusually quiet. Daniel's photograph stood beside the fireplace. Rebecca looked at it for several seconds. Then she looked at me. I need to understand something. I sat across from her. What would you like to understand? She folded her hands. Ethan says you've helped us. I said nothing. She continued. He says it's been going on for years. Yes. How much? I looked directly at her. Does the amount matter? Her eyes filled with frustration. Of course it matters. I took a deep breath, because after years of silence, I was finally going to tell the truth. The down payment on your house. She blinked. What? I paid it. She stared at me. The entire thing? Yes. She shook her head. No. I remained calm. Yes. She looked confused. Ethan said it came from savings. It came from my savings. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Then she whispered, Why? Because you were family. She looked away. I continued, Sophie's school tuition. Her eyes returned to me. I paid that too. She slowly sat back. The hospital bills after Sophie broke her arm. Silence. The insurance payments. Her breathing changed. Several credit card balances. She looked pale. The support account, the vehicle, the emergency repairs. Every sentence seemed to remove another piece of certainty from her face. Finally, she said, "No." I stood up. Without speaking, I walked to my office. I carried several folders back into the living room. Receipts, statements, bank records, transfers, years of quiet support. I placed them on the table. Rebecca stared at the papers. The room became completely silent. She picked up one statement. My name, my account, the payment. She looked at another, then another. Her hands began shaking. This can't be real. It is. She looked at me. Why didn't you tell me? I answered honestly, because I wanted you to love me for who I was. Tears appeared in her eyes. But Ethan lied. Yes. She lowered her head. He told me everything was because of his work. I nodded. For several minutes, she said nothing. Then she asked a question I never expected. Did everyone know? No. Your friends? No. The family? No. Only Ethan. Mostly. She looked completely lost. Because her entire reality was changing. The successful life, the expensive neighborhood, the new car, the private school, everything she proudly displayed, everything she believed they had earned alone. All of it suddenly looked different. Then she said the words I had waited to hear. I called you a burden. I looked at her. Yes. She began crying. Real tears. Not dramatic, not angry, just shocked. I didn't know. No. I swear I didn't know. I believe you. That surprised her. You do? Yes. She stared at me. Then why are you so calm? I looked toward Daniel's photograph. Because I already cried. The front door opened. Ethan entered. He stopped when he saw the folders. He looked at Rebecca. She looked at him. The silence between them felt enormous. Finally, Rebecca stood. How could you lie to me? Ethan looked exhausted. I was ashamed. Of what? Needing help. She pointed toward the papers. All of this. He nodded. She began crying again. You let me believe things. He answered quietly. I wanted you to think I could provide. Rebecca sat down. I told people things. I know. I said your mother depended on us. I remained silent. She looked at me. Oh my God. At that moment, Sophie walked downstairs. Nobody had realized Ethan brought her. She looked around the room. What's wrong? Rebecca immediately wiped her tears. Nothing. But children always know. Sophie walked over to me. She climbed into my lap. And suddenly, Rebecca started crying again. Because perhaps, for the first time, she understood exactly what she had nearly destroyed. Not money, not pride, family. After Sophie went upstairs with Ethan, Rebecca spoke quietly. I need to ask you something. What? Do you hate me? I thought carefully. Because the answer mattered. No. She seemed surprised. Why not? I smiled sadly. Because hate is exhausting. She lowered her eyes. I called you useless. I stood. Without speaking, I walked to my desk. I opened a folder. Inside were screenshots Ethan had recently sent me. Messages, texts, words. Rebecca looked at them. One message said, "That useless old woman." Another, "She's always around." Another, "She needs us more than we need her." Rebecca covered her face. I said those things. Yes. She cried quietly. The room became silent again. Then Ethan returned. He sat beside his wife. For the first time in years, nobody was hiding. No lies, no excuses, no stories, just truth. I looked at both of them. I never wanted repayment. Ethan nodded. I know. I never wanted gratitude. Rebecca wiped her eyes. What do you want? I answered immediately. Respect. Nobody spoke. I continued. I lost my husband. I lost my best friend. I gave what I could because I loved my family. I looked directly at Rebecca. But I will never again sit at a table and be called a burden. She began crying harder. I'm sorry. The words finally came. Not, I'm sorry if you were offended. Not, I'm sorry you felt hurt. Simply, I'm sorry. And for the first time since that birthday dinner, I believed her. But apologies do not erase consequences. The papers still sat on the table. The truth still existed. And before that evening ended, both Rebecca and Ethan understood something they had never fully realized. The woman they had treated as weak had quietly carried their entire family for years. And now that the truth had finally entered the room, nothing could ever return to the way it had been before. The week after Rebecca came to my house felt strange. For years, I had lived with silence. Now, everyone wanted to talk. Ethan called almost every day. Rebecca sent messages. Even Sophie asked if we could all have dinner together. But I needed time. Not because I was angry, because I was finally hearing my own voice. One afternoon, I sat on my porch with Linda. She listened while I explained everything that had happened. Rebecca discovering the truth, the documents, the tears, the apologies. Linda sipped her coffee. So, what happens now? I looked at the trees. I honestly don't know. Do you forgive her? I thought carefully. I think forgiveness is easier than trust. Linda nodded. That's true. Because trust had been broken in many places. Rebecca had insulted me. Ethan had lied. And I had hidden the truth for years. All three of us had helped create this situation. That evening, Rebecca sent me a text. Could we please talk again? I agreed. She arrived carrying a small box. She looked nervous. I brought these. Inside the box were photographs. Pictures of Daniel. Pictures of Ethan as a child. Family vacations. Christmas mornings. I looked at her. Where did you find these? In the attic. She sat quietly. I've been going through things. I noticed her eyes were swollen. She had been crying. She picked up one photograph. Daniel stood beside Ethan at a fishing lake. You never talk much about him. I smiled softly. It hurts. She nodded. I understand that now. That sentence surprised me. For years, Rebecca had focused on herself. Now she was finally asking about someone else. She pointed to another photograph. You built everything together. Yes. The business too? Yes. She stared at the picture. I think I forgot that you had an entire life before me. I said nothing, because that was exactly the truth. To Rebecca, I had simply been Ethan's mother, the older woman, the grandmother, the widow. She had never truly seen Margaret Wilson, the woman, the wife, the business owner, the partner who had spent decades building a future. Rebecca finally said something difficult. I was jealous of you. I looked surprised. Jealous? She nodded. Ethan loves you. I remained quiet. He calls you when he's upset. He trusts you. He listens to you. Tears filled her eyes. And I always felt second. That confession changed everything. Because suddenly, I saw the insecurity beneath the arrogance. The fear beneath the criticism. Rebecca continued. When the money problem started, I felt like I was losing control. She looked down. So I blamed you. I listened carefully. Not because excuses matter, but because truth matters. She continued. When you helped Sophie, I felt guilty. When Ethan visited you, I felt excluded. When Sophie loved spending time with you, I felt replaced. I finally understood. The problem had never been my presence. It had been her fear. Fear often becomes anger, and anger often becomes cruelty. That evening ended quietly. As she prepared to leave, Rebecca stopped at the front door. I don't expect forgiveness, I answered honestly. That's good. She nodded. I want to earn it. For the first time in years, I believed she meant it. 2 days later, Ethan invited me to lunch. We met at the same diner. He looked different, still tired, but lighter somehow. She knows everything now. Everything? He nodded. The accounts. The house. The tuition. The support account. I stirred my coffee. How is she handling it? He laughed softly. Not very well. I looked at him. Meaning? She keeps saying she doesn't understand how she missed it. I smiled sadly. Because she wasn't looking. He nodded. For a while we simply talked. Not about money. Not about Rebecca. Just mother and son. Then he finally asked something important. Do you regret helping us? The answer came immediately. No. He looked surprised. Really? I regret the silence. He stared at the table. So do I. I reached across and touched his hand. Your father would have helped too. Tears appeared in his eyes. I miss him. So do I. For the first time in years, we spoke openly about Daniel, his advice, his humor, his dreams. The conversation healed something between us. That weekend, Sophie had her dance recital. I wasn't sure if I should attend. Then Rebecca called. "I'd like you to sit with us." The old fear returned. The dinner, the humiliation, the silence. I almost said no, but Sophie deserved better. So I went. The auditorium was crowded. Parents, grandparents, teachers, children. Rebecca saved me a seat. Beside her. Not behind her. Not across the room. Beside her. People greeted us. Several neighbors recognized me. One woman said, "It's good to see you." Rebecca looked at me. Then she did something unexpected. "This is Margaret." She smiled softly. "Sophie's grandmother." She paused. "And honestly, our family wouldn't be where we are without her." The woman smiled. I looked at Rebecca. She looked nervous, but she continued. "She's done more for us than we ever deserved." Silence. Not uncomfortable silence. Respectful silence. For the first time, the truth entered a public room, and nobody laughed. Nobody judged. Nobody called me a burden. After the recital, Sophie ran toward us. She hugged both of us. "Did you like it?" Rebecca smiled. "We loved it." That evening, we all had dinner together. Not at their house. Not at mine. At a small restaurant. Neutral ground. The conversation felt awkward at first, but slowly it became easier. Near the end of dinner, Rebecca looked at me. "I need to ask one more thing." "What?" She took a deep breath. "Why didn't you ever stop helping us?" I looked at Sophie, then Ethan, then Rebecca, because the answer was simple. Because family isn't a transaction. Nobody spoke. I continued. "But respect is not optional." Rebecca nodded. Tears appeared again. I understand now. Perhaps she did. Perhaps she was only beginning. But one thing had definitely changed. The woman who once believed I needed her had finally realized that she had depended on me all along. And now the real question was not whether I would forgive her. It was whether our family could learn to live honestly for the very first time. The first bill arrived 3 weeks later. Rebecca was sitting at the kitchen table when Ethan called me. "Mom." His voice sounded tired. "What happened?" He sighed. "The credit card company called." I remained silent. For years, I had quietly helped cover those balances. Now the support had stopped. Reality had started. I had not cut off Ethan completely. I still paid Sophie's school tuition directly. The education fund remained untouched. Sophie's future would never become a weapon. But everything else had changed. The emergency transfers stopped. The extra help stopped. The hidden safety net disappeared. For the first time in years, Ethan and Rebecca had to face their actual financial situation. And it frightened them. A few days later, Rebecca called. Her voice sounded very different from the woman who had once laughed at me. "Margaret." "Hello?" I wanted to ask you something. Go ahead. She hesitated. Did you stop the transfers? Yes. Silence. Then she asked, Why? I answered honestly, because I was never supposed to support your lifestyle. She said nothing. I continued. I helped during difficult times. Another silence. But things became permanent. Her voice became softer. I understand. I wasn't sure she did, but she was beginning to. That weekend, Ethan came to my townhouse. He looked exhausted. How bad is it? I asked. He sat heavily in the chair. Worse than I thought. He explained everything. The credit cards, the car payments, the country club membership, the expensive subscriptions, the shopping accounts, the dining expenses. Over the years, Rebecca had become accustomed to a life they could not actually afford, and Ethan had hidden the truth. He had believed promotions would come, raises, bonuses, something. Instead, the debt grew. I asked quietly, Does Rebecca know everything now? He nodded. Most of it. And he laughed bitterly. She cried. I said nothing. He looked at me. She says she never realized. I remembered something Rebecca had once said. We're finally moving up in the world. The truth was harder. They had been standing on borrowed stability. My stability. Daniel's work. Our sacrifices. That evening, I received a text from Rebecca. Could I come by? I hesitated, but I agreed. When I entered the house, I immediately noticed changes. The expensive decorations were gone. Several paintings had disappeared. The new patio furniture was missing. Rebecca sat quietly at the table. No makeup, no expensive jewelry, no confidence. Just Rebecca. She looked up. We sold some things. I nodded. The furniture. The designer bags. Yeah. The second membership. I sat down. She looked embarrassed. I didn't know how much we spent. I answered honestly. Sometimes people don't want to know. Tears filled her eyes. I thought Ethan was succeeding. He wanted you to think that. She looked down. And I wanted to believe it. For the first time, she accepted responsibility. Not completely, but enough. She suddenly asked a question. Were you angry every time you saw me buying things? I thought carefully. No. Why not? Because I thought you would eventually understand. She lowered her eyes. I didn't. No. The room became quiet. Then she said something I never expected. I told people terrible things about you. I nodded. I know. I said you depended on us. I remained silent. She began crying. I told people you were lonely. I looked at her. I was lonely. She looked surprised. But I wasn't your burden. That sentence seemed to break something inside her, because she finally understood. She had mistaken kindness for weakness. She had mistaken generosity for need, and she had mistaken silence for helplessness. Several days later, Linda called. How are things? I smiled. Different. Better. I don't know. Because justice does not always feel satisfying. Sometimes it feels sad. Rebecca was paying the price for her choices, but I did not enjoy watching her suffer. One afternoon, Sophie visited. We baked cookies. She looked happier. Mom and Dad aren't yelling. I smiled. That's good. She nodded. Mom says we have to save money. I laughed softly. That's not a bad thing. She looked at me. Mom says she made mistakes. Children notice everything, and perhaps that was good, because Sophie was learning something important. Money matters. Truth matters. Respect matters. The following week, Ethan invited me to dinner. This time, the atmosphere felt different. No expensive wine, no large gatherings, no performances, just family. Halfway through the meal, Rebecca looked directly at me. I need to tell you something. I waited. She took a deep breath. I thought you were too kind to fight back. The room became silent. Even Ethan looked surprised. She continued. I thought you would always stay quiet. I said nothing. Tears filled her eyes. I thought you needed us. I looked at her calmly. No. She nodded. I know that now. For years. Rebecca had believed she held power. The younger woman, the wife, the mother, the person in control. But power built on lies eventually collapses. And now she sat across from me, finally understanding that the quiet woman she once called a burden had carried the family when nobody else could. After dinner, Ethan walked me to my car. He looked tired, but calmer. I think she's changing. I looked at the house. I hope so. He nodded. She's ashamed. I opened my car door. Shame isn't enough. He looked at me. What is? I answered honestly. Growth. As I drove home, I thought about Daniel, about the years we spent working, about the sacrifices, about the money. But mostly, I thought about respect. Money had never been the real issue. The real issue was value. For years, Rebecca measured value through houses, cars, clothes, appearances. Now she was learning a different lesson. The most valuable person in a room is often the one nobody notices. And sometimes, the quietest person carries the heaviest weight. Winter arrived early that year. The first snow fell during the second week of December. I stood by my living room window, watching the snow cover the trees. For the first time in many months, my house felt peaceful. Not lonely, peaceful. The difference mattered. I had stopped waiting for phone calls, stopped worrying about Rebecca, stopped trying to rescue everyone. And somehow, my family slowly began finding its way back to me. One Saturday morning, Sophie arrived carrying a school project. Grandma, can you help me? Of course. She spread papers across my kitchen table. The assignment was called Family Heroes. She smiled. I picked you. I laughed softly. Why me? She answered immediately. Because you help everybody. Children often see the truth adults miss. As we worked together, she asked questions about Daniel, about our business. about my childhood, about how Ethan grew up. For years, nobody had asked me those things. I had become Ethan's mother, Sophie's grandmother, the older woman. Now, for the first time, somebody wanted to know Margaret Wilson. When Ethan arrived later that afternoon, he looked different, healthier. He smiled more. He seemed lighter. "Things are improving," he said. I poured coffee. "At home?" He nodded. "We made a budget." I smiled. "That sounds very adult." He laughed. "We sold the SUV. That surprised me. Really. We couldn't justify it. And Rebecca agreed. She suggested it. That surprised me even more. For years, the SUV had represented success, status, appearance. Now it was gone. Perhaps that meant something deeper had changed. A week later, Rebecca called. "Could you come over?" When I arrived, the house felt different, simpler. Several expensive decorations were gone. The atmosphere felt quieter, warmer. Rebecca stood in the kitchen. She looked nervous. "I want to show you something." She handed me several envelopes. Inside were handwritten notes. I looked at her. "What are these?" She lowered her eyes. "Letters." "To whom?" "People I lied to." I opened one. It was addressed to one of her neighbors, another to a friend, another to a woman from the country club. Inside each letter, she apologized. She admitted she had spoken unfairly about me. She admitted she had misrepresented our relationship. I looked up. "You sent these?" She nodded. "Most of them." "Why?" Tears appeared in her eyes. "Because I wanted to stop lying." That answer stayed with me. Because the real problem had never been money. It had always been pride. And pride had finally begun losing. Several days later, Ethan invited me to dinner. Just family. No guests, no neighbors, no performances. When I entered the dining room, something caught my attention. The chair beside Ethan was empty. Rebecca smiled. "That's your seat." For years, I had sat at the end of the table, or beside Sophie, or wherever space existed. Now she had placed me beside my son. The gesture seemed small, but it meant everything. During dinner, Sophie asked, "Grandma, what was Grandpa like?" The room became quiet. I smiled. "He worked very hard." "What else?" "He loved your father." She looked at Ethan. "Daddy cried when Grandpa died." Ethan nodded. "A lot." Rebecca reached for his hand. No embarrassment. No discomfort. Just honesty. After dessert, Rebecca disappeared into another room. She returned carrying a framed photograph. It was Daniel. She handed it to me. "I thought he should be here." My eyes filled with tears, because for years, Daniel had felt absent from that house. Now his photograph sat on their fireplace, as if he had finally come home. Later that evening, Rebecca and I washed dishes together. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "I've been ashamed." I continued drying a plate. Good. She looked surprised. Good. Shame means you understand. Tears appeared in her eyes. I was horrible. Yes. I don't know why. I looked at her. I think you do. She nodded slowly. Fear, insecurity, jealousy, pride. All the things she had finally admitted. She looked at me. Can you ever trust me again? I answered honestly. Trust grows slowly. She nodded. I'll wait. That answer mattered. Because for the first time, she was not demanding forgiveness. She was earning it. A week before Christmas, Ethan called. Mom. Yes? I want to ask you something. What? Would you spend Christmas morning with us? For several seconds. I couldn't answer, because the last Christmas with Daniel had been difficult. The years after his death had been lonely, and the previous year had been filled with tension. This invitation felt different. Not out of obligation, out of love. Yes, I finally said. Christmas morning arrived with snow. Sophie ran toward me the moment I entered the house. Grandma. She hugged me tightly. The tree sparkled. Music played softly. The fireplace burned. For the first time in years, I felt truly welcome. After breakfast, Ethan stood. He held a small box. Mom. Everyone looked at him. I need to say something. His voice shook. I spent years pretending I was stronger than I was. Rebecca reached for his hand. He continued. I let pride become more important than honesty. He looked at me. And I let you carry burdens that belong to me. The room became silent. Tears filled his eyes. I am sorry. I stood. I hugged my son. And suddenly, the years of silence began disappearing. Later that afternoon, Rebecca sat beside me near the fireplace. She looked at Daniel's photograph. I wish I had known him. I smiled. He would have liked you. She looked shocked. After everything, I nodded. Because he believed people could change. She began crying again. This time, I placed my hand over hers. Because perhaps Daniel was right. People can change, but only when they finally tell the truth. And as I sat surrounded by my family, I realized something. The woman who had once called me a burden was no longer sitting across from me. She was sitting beside me, still imperfect, still healing, but finally learning what family truly means. 1 year later, my life looked very different. Not perfect, but peaceful. The first thing that changed was me. For years, I had measured my value by how useful I was to other people. Mother, grandmother, helper, problem solver, financial support. I thought love meant giving until nothing remained. Daniel used to tell me, Margaret, even the strongest tree needs roots. For a long time, I forgot my own roots. But during that year, I found them again. I joined a gardening club. I started volunteering twice a week at the local library. Linda convinced me to travel with her. For the first time since Daniel died, I took a vacation, just for myself. I walked along the coast of Maine. I sat beside the ocean. And one evening, I spoke to Daniel aloud. We survived this, because somehow I felt he had walked beside me through the entire year. Back in Columbus, Ethan's life had changed too. He no longer hid bills. He no longer avoided difficult conversations. He and Rebecca attended counseling. Not because their marriage was perfect, because both of them finally understood that honesty was less painful than silence. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan came to my house. He carried 2 cups of coffee. He smiled. "I have news." "What happened?" He sat down. "I received a promotion." I smiled. "Congratulations." He laughed. "This one is real." Those words made both of us smile, because for years, success had been an illusion. Now it was something he had actually earned. He looked at me. I wish Dad could see this. I looked toward Daniel's photograph. He can. Ethan became quiet. I spent so many years trying to prove I was enough. You always were. Tears appeared in his eyes. I didn't believe that. I reached for his hand. Neither did Rebecca. He nodded. That was the truth. Their marriage had suffered because both of them feared failure. And fear had created lies. Meanwhile, Sophie was growing quickly. She was 10 years old now, taller, more confident, still kind. Every Friday evening, she came to my house. That tradition never changed. We baked cookies, watched movies, talked about school. One night she asked me, "Grandma, were you really angry at Mom?" I thought carefully. "No, not even when she hurt you," I smiled. I was hurt. "What's the difference?" Children ask beautiful questions. I answered slowly. Being hurt is natural. Staying angry forever is a choice. She nodded. "I think Mom still feels bad." I looked at her. "Sometimes feeling bad helps us become better." Sophie smiled. "I think she's trying." And she was. Rebecca had changed. Not suddenly, not perfectly, but genuinely. The expensive shopping stopped. The endless comparisons disappeared. She left the country club. She began working full-time again. She volunteered at Sophie's school. Most importantly, she learned to listen. One afternoon, she came to visit me. She carried a notebook. "What is that?" She smiled nervously. "My budget." I laughed. "You brought me your budget." She nodded. "I actually need advice. For years, Rebecca would never have asked me for help, because asking for help requires humility." We sat at the kitchen table for almost 2 hours. Savings, debt, investments, goals, future plans. When we finished, she looked at me. "I wish I had done this years ago." I smiled. "So do I." She became quiet. Then she said the words I never expected to hear. "I spent years competing with you." I looked surprised. "Competing?" She nodded. "I thought Ethan loved you more." I reached across the table. He loved us differently. Tears appeared in her eyes. I understand that now. 1 month later, Charles Bennett called. He wanted to review my estate documents. This time, I made several changes. Not because I was angry, because I was wiser. I created a separate educational trust for Sophie. A trust that only she could access when she became an adult. For college, for her future, for her dreams. No one else would control it. Not Ethan, not Rebecca, only Sophie. Charles looked at me. Are you comfortable with this? I smiled. Very, because Daniel and I had always wanted our work to help future generations. And now I knew exactly how to do that. That evening, I invited the family to dinner. Nothing fancy. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, apple pie, the same meals Daniel loved. As we sat together, I looked around the table. Ethan, Rebecca, Sophie, family, real family. Not perfect, but honest. Halfway through dinner, Rebecca looked at me. I've wanted to ask you something. What is it? She took a deep breath. Why didn't you leave us after everything? The room became quiet. Even Sophie looked at me. I thought about Daniel. The years. The pain. The betrayal. The forgiveness. Then I answered. Because people can fail without becoming evil. Rebecca began crying. I was cruel. Yes. I hurt you. Yes. Why stay? I smiled softly. Because Sophie deserved a family. The room became silent. Then Ethan stood. He raised his glass. To Mom. Rebecca raised hers. Sophie copied them. I laughed. Ethan spoke quietly. You spent years carrying all of us. Rebecca wiped away tears. And we didn't even know. I looked around the room. The important thing is that you know now. After dinner, Sophie walked outside with me. The sun was setting. She slipped her hand into mine. Grandma. Yes. I'm glad you stayed. I looked down at her. So am I. Because life had taught me something important. Love should never require humiliation. Kindness should never require silence. And generosity should never require losing yourself. Rebecca once called me a burden. She believed I needed her. She believed I was weak. But in the end, she learned the truth. The woman she had dismissed had quietly protected her family for years. And I learned something too. The strongest people are not the loudest. Sometimes they are simply the ones who continue loving without losing their dignity. As I stood beside my granddaughter beneath the evening sky, I thought of Daniel, and for the first time since his death, I felt completely at peace. When Daniel died, I believed the hardest part of my life was over. I was wrong. Losing a husband is painful, but losing your place inside your own family can feel even more devastating. For years, I thought love meant sacrifice. I believed that if I kept giving, helping, and protecting everyone around me, my family would naturally understand my heart. But life taught me something different. Love should never require humiliation. Kindness should never require silence. And generosity should never require someone to lose their dignity. Rebecca's greatest mistake was not spending money. It was believing that value comes from appearances, success, or status. She judged me by my age, my quietness, and my willingness to help. She mistook grace for weakness. Ethan's mistake was different. He allowed fear to replace honesty. He wanted to protect his pride so badly that he built his marriage on silence. And silence can become very expensive. My own mistake was believing that suffering quietly was noble. I thought protecting my family meant hiding the truth. But sometimes truth is the greatest gift we can give the people we love. Real families are not built by money. They are built by respect. They survive because of honesty, and they heal because people choose to change. Rebecca changed because she finally faced the truth. Ethan changed because he stopped pretending, and I changed because I finally remembered that my worth was never connected to what I gave others. If you are a mother, grandmother, or someone who spends their entire life taking care of everyone else, please remember this. Your kindness is valuable. Your sacrifices matter. Your voice deserves to be heard. And no one has the right to make you feel like a burden simply because you love them. Sometimes the strongest people are not the loudest ones in the room. They are the people who continue loving while refusing to lose themselves. Thank you for spending this journey with me. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt unappreciated by someone you loved? What would you have done in my place? Please like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional family stories like this. And before you leave, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city right now. I always love hearing from you.